Adrian.
Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's class, Painting a Strawberry in Watercolor, Gouache, and Ink. I am your instructor, Adrian Hodge, and tonight's class is 90 minutes, and we will be covering just the preliminary sort of basics for getting started with watercolor, gouache, and ink, and how to layer the first and second and hopefully subsequent layers of a painting using the same subject, a strawberry. For each one of these, we'll be discussing the differences between these three water painting mediums, watercolor, gouache, and ink, and discussing the differences and similarities between them. And then we'll be seeing the differences and similarities between them as we paint the same subject with all three of them. So we've got a lot to cover, but before we get started, I wanted to talk about the class that we have coming up next week. It is rescheduled from last week. We'll be drawing expressive eyes using the planes of the face in pen and ink. And we'll be starting out with sort of a colored pencil or a specific pencil that I put on the supply list for that one that's got this nice sanguine color. And then we'll be building on that and layering it with illustration pens. And then we'll be erasing the pencil underneath. So you can use a regular pencil as well. And then we'll erase the pencil underneath and we'll have these sketches of some expressive eyes. So make sure you sign up for that class if you haven't already. Chanel just dropped the link to that class for June 26th, Drawing Expressive Eyes in Pen and Ink. And if you're watching later on YouTube before that date, you can find that on the Michaels website and sign up to join us as well. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my tabletop view and we'll get started. Don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes. You can also tag Learn with Michaels and follow Learn with Michaels on Instagram. And I'm on Instagram at Adrian Hodge Art. And Chanel also has my link tree that she can drop in the chat for you. Or if you find me on Instagram, that is in the link in my bio. And you can check out all the other things that I have coming up that I do, classes I teach online, like my online draw club on Saturday morning that I do independently, not affiliated with Michaels. But worth mentioning if you enjoy my teaching style, and then I also teach in-person classes in Austin, Texas. So yeah, and there's some of my business cards. I'm also on Facebook, Adrian Hodge Fine Art. And I use a lot of calligraphy ink in my personal art that I make. And so I teach all three of these very often. And we have had a lot of watercolor classes since I've been teaching these classes for Michaels over the last 3 years. It's actually 3 years next month, which is exciting. And we've done several gouache classes as well, and we've done a couple of liquid ink classes. And so I wanted to do this class where I explain the differences and similarities between all three of them. So I'm going to go over the supplies that I have and just want you to keep in mind that, you know, results will vary. I will probably go quickly. So hopefully nobody's going to get, you know, frustrated if I go too quickly. You'll have the recording that you can find on YouTube tomorrow starting at about noon. The recording will probably be listed sometime tomorrow, and you can watch the playback, you can slow it down, you can pause it to catch up. I also put the option of a hair dryer on the supply list to help speed up the drying process on these layers, and I'm going to be at the mercy of letting my layers dry. So we'll see how far we get. That's why I wanted to start the class by saying we're most likely not going to get to like a level of completion with all of these, like what mine look like here, but I'm going to show you how to get there. And I may have to demonstrate on this completed example because my other example is likely to be too wet to get that far, like in the 90 minutes. So just keep that in mind that, you know, our results will always vary on these classes and depends on where you are in your personal art journey. So try not to compare yourself to my examples here or anybody else's examples at the end of class because we're all on our individual journeys there. Okay, so to start off, I shared this reference image of a strawberry with you, just one image. I've got some Artist Loft watercolor, and any watercolor set that you have will do fine. I've also got this Artist Loft jelly gouache set. Any gouache that you have will be fine. And then I have the Sennelier brand ink, and I've got red, blue, lemon yellow. I've got the carmine and the cobalt blue, by the way. It's any blue or red ink and yellow ink that you have will be just fine. And then I've got this brown, oh, I grabbed the burnt sienna instead of the walnut stain. You do want to have like a nice dark brown for the ink because we're going to be making our black using the blue and the brown for those dark shadows. Black ink would work fine. Any primary inks that you have will work fine. And then I've got the Winsor Newton calligraphy white. And yeah, normally there's always lots of questions about the supplies. And usually I say make substitutes, but for this one, you're definitely going to want watercolor, gouache, and ink if we're, you know, trying to compare those three. And then I have several brushes here, but you're really just going to want a good flat brush, a round brush, and a fine liner brush would get you through the entire class, although I might be using a couple other size brushes as well. You're going to want a few sketching pencils and some paper. And you're definitely going to want some tape because I'm going to be taping off these little rectangles here to separate our strawberry paintings. And if you want yours to look like mine, then you're going to want some tape to do that. And then I've got some water cups off screen here. I've got a plastic palette with some nice wells in it. I've got some paper towels and I think that's it. And a sketch pad. I've got the Artist Loft drawing pad here. All right. I think we're ready to get started. Are there any questions about supplies? Oh, and then watercolor paper. I didn't mention that, but watercolor paper is what I've got here underneath this watercolor paper. I've got an Artist Loft watercolor pad. It's the watercolor pad. It's 20 sheets, 140 pounds. That's as far as I can scoot it up without knocking some things over. But yeah, any questions about the supplies before we dive in further?
There are no questions so far.
Okay, great. All right. So the first thing I want to do is just a little sketch of this strawberry to get us started and to talk about moving some of these many supplies around my desk to make some room. All right, so I want to look at this strawberry together and just do a quick sketch of it because when I get it sketched out on the watercolor paper, I'm going to move a little quickly and you might not be able to see all of my pencil lines. So I want to make sure that we've at least drawn it together. And I'm going to draw it nice and dark using a 6B pencil so that my lines show up on the screen. If you want to use a lighter H pencil to sketch the strawberry, that is up to you, so that you can erase your lines if you need to. I do recommend using a lighter pencil when you're sketching, and definitely so that you can erase your lines on the, I'm going to use a lighter pencil on the sketch on the watercolor paper in just a minute. Okay, so we have a teardrop shape here for the strawberry. So it's gonna look like a guitar pick, or maybe a teardrop, or maybe a planchette pointer on a Ouija board, if you know what that is. All right, or a cursor. So we're looking for, yeah, this like shield shape, or maybe you could call it a teardrop. It's nice and fat at the top, and then it's nice and narrow at the bottom. So just getting that general shape sketched out. And then I want to talk about the contours. So those are the elevational lines that describe the 3 dimensions of a form. And on the horizontal axis, we've got, this photo was taken right above the strawberry. So we have a bit of like an equator line in the center here where this would be the eye line. And then we're going to have some curved lines going down. It feels curved down to me at the bottom of the strawberry. And then it feels like there's an upward curve at the top of the strawberry, because again, the photograph was taken with the eye line right in the center here. So we want to think about these as being the contours of the strawberry shape on the horizontal axis. And then on the vertical axis, we've got another bit of an equator line here in the center. And then we're going to have curved lines going out towards the left and the right. So this is like our Tron strawberry here that feels nice and 3-dimensional and rounded. It might even be curved even more down here towards the top, more dramatic curves going more like that. And it's a little uneven here at the top as well. Okay, and then we have these leaves sticking out of the strawberry, and those are going to curve in a few different directions. This one appears to be curving more towards the viewer. And the value, the light and dark shapes that I see glistening on this wet strawberry are going to follow these contours. So you don't have to get these exact, even if just a couple of them feel slightly more 3-dimensional like this, then that will help you get some 3 dimensions going. And like I said, I'm going a little quickly here. If this is all brand new to you, you've never heard of contour lines, then you might want to check out some of the other classes that I've had over these last 3 years. I do this with almost every single subject. I describe the contour lines to help see the 3 dimensions of a 3-dimensional form and break down a lot of different subjects this way. So, but there's a basic class on rendering 3D forms using contour lines where we used a lime, looking at a lime in all different directions. You can find that easily on YouTube by searching the keywords contour lines and my name or Michael's. But we're just really looking to see that all of these things feel 3-dimensional. So we're not going to draw it like this on the watercolor paper. We're just sketching it like this right now just to get an understanding. And if it's really brand new to you, then just, try to do your best. The main idea is that when we put our value on there, our light and dark shapes, the shapes that show shadows and the shapes that show light, we want to make sure that those are following these curves. So all these like little areas of light that are falling across the leaves where you can really see the light glistening here. We want those to follow those curves. And likewise on the strawberry itself, we've got all these seeds. And I'm just erasing some of those contours just to put the seeds in there. We've got a lot of little diamond shapes, and then the seeds are inside of there. But all of the diamond shapes of what's surrounding the seeds are following these curved lines. So the more we have the this understanding of these elevational curves, the more we can put on these details in a way that helps it feel three-dimensional. So even just aiming for this curved nature of the strawberry as we're painting it will help you to make it look more three-dimensional. So like this big light area right here on the side is going to follow that elevational curve, and this big shadow on the side of the strawberry is going to follow that elevational curve. And then we can do things like put the shadow that's falling across the table surface here. When we put that in, we want that to feel nice and flat. So I'm just going to sketch that using a strong diagonal line here. So that maybe even go back with some cross hatching, and just we want to make sure that we're describing that in a way that feels nice and flat. And then we've got a couple of leaf shadows sticking off of there. So when we have that coupled with all of our curved lines that we'll be painting our brush strokes, maintaining these curves and putting these values and everything on it in a way that curves, it should feel pretty nice and rounded and three-dimensional. Okay, any questions about just sketching the strawberry or the three dimensions of the strawberry before we move on to that final paper? Let's see. Okay, thank you, Chanel. I see those wonderful responses to some of those questions. Okay, so let's get our paper taped off on this final paper here. I have one thing I didn't put on the supply list that you might want to grab really quickly would be like a Post-it or a business card or something like that. I'm actually gonna, or like even a plain card would be great because we need a rectangle shape. And I have this little hack that I learned from a YouTube art teacher, Jenny Granberry, who also teaches here in Austin at the Art Museum, the Contemporary Austin, where I teach. She's a friend of mine, and she has this little device where she traces a business card or a Post-it or something to get a nice little thumbnail in a sketchbook page. And I've adopted that. I just want to give her credit for that teaching device here. So I'm using this rectangular card here, and I'm just kind of eyeballing it to get it three in a row here, and then we'll tape it off. They do not have to be perfectly spaced, and they don't have to be perfectly drawn. Just getting three rectangles on there. You can sketch them yourself. You can grab a ruler. But tracing a card is a nice, fast way to make that happen. And then we'll take our painter's tape and get this all taped off. And there's a couple of different reasons to tape off your margins like this. For one, we're going to be splashing some water in here, and it'll just give it a nice little frame. And then also it keeps your paper from buckling quite as much. You could tape it down like to the table surface to keep that from happening even more. And I probably should have left more space in between these, but I was trying to make them all squeeze in on the Zoom screen. So I'm gonna have to rip my tape in
Hey,
half.
Adrian,
Yeah.
did you say the cards were like regular playing card size?
I mean, it depends on your the paper that they're using, but yeah, just whatever card size you have that would be a rectangle and you could fit 3 of them on your watercolor paper.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was actually a tarot card that I just used. Like a cute little whale tarot card, but you could use a plain card as well. My business cards that I have here are squares. So, and I wanted a rectangle because this strawberry is a rectangle frame, has a rectangle frame. All right, I'm just gonna have to do a little surgery here in the spacing in between to get my tape in here. I'm just ripping my tape in half and then I'm gonna puzzle piece it together to get it to be nice and straight. Okay, so while I'm doing that, to make use of this tedious moment, I can start to talk about the differences between watercolor, ink, and gouache. So all paint is just pigment plus some kind of binder, right? Like you can make your own ink even by using a binder like gum arabic, and then you could use like ground up coffee, or you could take some charcoal and you could make black ink if you had those those 2 items. So it's pretty easy to make ink or make paint. There's some wonderful blogs and people you could follow out there on making your own ink. The National Park Service even has that. I recently did something like that for my draw club and had everyone make handmade ink and use sticks that they found in their yard so we could be really kind of primitive like that. And it was really lovely. But anyway, my point is that the main difference between these 3 mediums is just the amount of binders that are added, and that's really it. They're all water-based. They can all be mixed with water, and they all have a different amount of transparency. So watercolor is going to be the most transparent, and gouache is going to be, it's basically opaque watercolor, so it's more opaque. It has a higher opacity, means it's not transparent. You can't see through it unless you water it down. And ink is like on the other end of a spectrum here. So if you've got ink on one end and watercolor on the other, gouache would be kind of right down the middle. And you're going to see whenever we do these first layers of these strawberries in just a moment here, they all start out looking very much the same. We're going to really water down all 3 of these to do the first layer. And we're going to have 3 strawberries that look pretty similar in that first layer. And then as we start to build the different layers, then you're going to start to see, and you're going to start to see the differences more and more. And gouache has a very matte finish, so that's another aspect of gouache that is interesting. Ink, especially the Sennelier brand, it has a shellac base in it. So that's how you can get this like kind of shiny sheen to happen, which is really nice. And yeah, the gouache, we can get it to be super opaque. We can get the ink to be pretty opaque as well. Watercolor, it's a little trickier to get it to be nice and thick where you can't see through it in some way. I mean, you can use it as direct as possible and definitely get it to be more opaque than transparent, but it's never going to be as opaque as gouache or ink. So those are the main differences. It's just the binders that are added to the pigments, just like the differences between acrylic and oil paint. It's different binders, which affects the paint. in different ways. But those are the main differences there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and sketch my strawberry on all three of these little rectangles, and I want to leave some room for the leaves at the top, and I want to leave some room on the side for that shadow. So with each of them, I'll try to get the center of it to be a little to the left, just to give myself room to sketch that shadow. And we're just adding one shadow on there, even though in the reference image you can see maybe 2 or 3 shadows underneath there. One of my leaves already got a little cut off, and that is totally fine. We're definitely not looking for identical versions of these strawberries. I think all 3 of my strawberries look a little different on that other example, and I definitely don't want you to agonize over making them all perfect and identical, and we'll all just, embrace whatever happens on each of these. Hopefully you're approaching this as more of a learning exercise and not trying to make something that's perfect and frameable that you can put in your guest bedroom. I always like to say, like, if that happens, that's just a nice bonus. But when we put those high of expectations on ourselves for things to be perfect, then sometimes that can set us up for disappointment or unnecessary stress in the process if we just think like, hey, especially if this is your first time working with ink or gouache or watercolor, and you're just checking out the scene on these 3 mediums, then yeah, go easy on yourself and those expectations that you have for yourself, so that you don't put unnecessary stress on the process. All right, getting this 3rd strawberry sketched in. And yeah, if you go nice and light with a light, like an H pencil, a pencil that has the letter H on it, then you should be able to erase your lines if you don't put a lot of pressure down on your pencil. With the ink and the gouache, we're going to completely cover up our lines. We shouldn't have any pencil lines peeking through, but on the watercolor one, we definitely could see those pencil lines if they're really dark. So just keep that in mind. All right, so I got my shadow on all 3 strawberries. I got the general shape of the leaves up there. I've got the general shape of everything. You could even go ahead and put that big shadow that's falling across on the side in there too, and then maybe really lightly where the highlights are going, just to have a little guide for yourself. We could also put this little lighter area up here at the top in on all 3 of them, just so that whenever we start to put our color on, we keep in mind that we want to leave it a little lighter in these areas, and that this area is going to be pretty dark. And even on my sketch, my 3 different strawberries are already looking different in a few ways. So just letting that happen, because we're not robots, y'all. We can't reproduce 3 identical things. Maybe it might happen as a happy accident or byproduct. All right, so I definitely made those longer and skinnier than I did on this other example, but that is totally cool. All right, so we're gonna go down the line here on all 3 of these. If you wanna, already pull out all 3 of those, the watercolor, the gouache, and the ink. We're gonna have all 3 going at the same time. We're gonna start with watercolor and then gouache and then ink, and then while each layer is is drying, while the watercolor is drying, we'll work on the gouache. While those two are drying, we'll work on the ink. Then this should be dry, and we'll try to just go down the line like that and see how far we get. We have exactly 1 hour. Okay, I think we can do it. I'm feeling good about it. Okay, so we're going to start with the color that is underneath in our strawberry, and we're going to work our way forward. So underneath, I'm seeing this kind of pale yellow. It's like a whitish yellow. And then I see like an orange right here. And then I see a darker red right here. And then a kind of lighter medium red on the rest of the strawberry. And then on the leaves, we've got yellow underneath. In a few spots, we'll just go ahead and use yellow underneath, and we'll use a lighter green for these highlights, and then we'll use a darker green with like a black. But so we're just starting with the lightest colors that we see first, and we're going to build on those with subsequent layers. And then we've got this gray background, and we've got the black shadow. So we're going to go ahead and fill in the gray background first, so that we can get that out of the way, at least the first layer, and then start working our way towards the front. With the strawberry, we'll try to do it in such a way that we're not letting any wet things touch each other, so that you know, it doesn't bleed too much. But if yours starts to get like too wet and things start bleeding together, just give it a second to dry. And I'm aware that I'm trying to like zip us along very quickly, but I want to make sure that before we get started, I say this because I'll repeat it, but I want to make sure everybody hears it because it's very important. But you always want to, with all of these mediums, with all three of them, your best policy, the policy that's going to give you the most control and the results that you're likely looking for, you really want to let each layer completely dry before you move on to the next layer. It's important with gouache, it's important with watercolor, it's important with ink. I can't say it enough. I teach a lot of in-person classes on all three of these mediums, and people are so impatient with letting their layers dry. And I would say 99% of the issues that, maybe not 99%, I would say overworking things. Well, I mean, that's also not letting it dry. Not using enough water is one issue that a lot of people have with all three of these mediums in the first layers, and then not letting the layers dry. Okay, so we're gonna actually paint with water first on this background of the watercolor. So we might even do this with the gouache as well, because it's gonna help us get a nice flat wash, which is a wash that doesn't have too many like streaks in it or anything. So I'm just going all the way around on the strawberry background, and might even want to, I mean, it's too late for me now because I already started painting, but maybe on these other two, I might drag my eraser over the top of some of these pencil lines and erase them. I always have to make my lines show up on the zoom, so I went a little darker with that pencil than I probably should have, and now it's bleeding a tiny bit into my water. So you could always just erase some of those pencil lines if they're too thick on your drawing as well. All right, so like I said, we want to use a lot of water here to keep to get these to be washes that we start with. So with all three of these, we're starting with washes. So that is like a puddle of paint with a little bit of pigment. So I'm going to take my paintbrush over to my black here to make a really watered down gray happen. So I'm going to take my paintbrush and just drip it onto my watercolor lid. and then add some black to that. Just making a really washy gray. So it's just a little puddle of water with a little bit of gray or black, and I'm gonna have to set that over here, else it's gonna spill around. There's a lot of supplies tonight, y'all. I'm like, I don't know if I can get everything to be on the screen, or else there's just gonna be so much floating around on my desk. Ooh, that is like, where is that going? It's dripping in a weird way. I'm worried it was gonna leak out of there. Okay, and then I'll just take that black and start filling in that background. And with all three of these, they look so much different dry versus wet. With the watercolor, it's going to dry, really all three of them, they dry. Well, no, that's not true. With watercolor and ink, they dry lighter than they look when you put them on. So like this wash looks like a pretty subdued gray. It's pretty light gray, but it might dry even lighter than this. So we can always do another layer on this after we do our first pass all the way around and come back. We could do another layer. I likely will not. I'm going to try not to, just because for the sake of time, but you're welcome to do another layer on yours, especially if you've got any weirdness in this first layer. So the hardest part is, like I said, I'm always trying to get people to be patient between their layers in my in-person classes, because the instinct is to want to fix what just happened in the first layer, but you really can't fix it too much because you don't know what it's going to look like when it's dry. Letting it dry might fix the issue that you're seeing when it's wet. So painting the layer and then letting it dry and then coming back to it is really the best policy, but it's one of the hardest things for people to put into practice. And I get it, you know, we're impatient. We want to see what's going to happen next, or we feel like we messed up maybe and we want to fix that. I absolutely understand, but you just have to have faith that letting it dry is the best policy, because one, it's going to look different. So you can't really assess what's happening when it's wet. And then two, when you overwork it, you start to get things like the paper will buckle, the paper will start to pill. It can start to bleed in ways that you're not happy with. A lot of crazy stuff can happen when you don't wait for it to dry. All right, so I just watered down some yellow, and I got a little puddle here of yellow. I can't hold it up because this lid is like, all my colors will start to bleed together, and I've just got to have it off to the side here, but I've got a little puddle of yellow and it's really watered down. So real watery puddle here. And I really should have erased those pencil lines, but I didn't. I'm going to wait for it. When this layer is dry, I'm going to erase those pencil lines. And that's kind of the nice thing about watercolor, is that you really, all three of these, you can erase your pencil lines through them when they are transparent, when they're nice and thin. Once they get thicker, like the other ones, you're not really going to see the pencil lines anymore. All right, so just getting a little bit of yellow on these leaves as well, where I'm seeing that lighter green or more of a yellowish color there. You could even paint the entire leaves yellow if you wanted, but I'm just bouncing around, and I'm also making sure that I'm following the three-dimensional curve that we talked about on these leaves. And make it, oh wait, I think that was one of my shadows. That's okay, because I'm gonna cover that up.
Adrian, we have a couple questions.
Okay, yeah.
What is the reason or advantage to painting the background first, or is it just a preference?
Well, it would be tricky to go back after we paint the strawberry and fill in the background. So it's easier to like cover up mistakes. Like if I accidentally bleed some of the gray onto the leaves, I should be able to fix that. But if I were to paint the leaves first, it might be kind of hard to go in between and add the gray. So it's really just a matter of making it easier on myself later by logistically, not painting myself into a corner.
And then the other question is why introduce yellow?
Because there is yellow underneath. There's a pale yellow on the strawberry, and it seems to be underneath the red. So we're painting from the background forward. So we're kind of layering based on the colors that we're seeing underneath. So, and I see yellow in the leaves as well, but there's like green on top of the yellow. So I'm just painting in order of the appearance of the colors. Okay, so like I said, when I was describing the colors that I was seeing before, the next one that I see is kind of an orangey color. So I'm watering down a nice orange and then going a little bit on top of that yellow and really just in this top half of the strawberry. Putting an orange and I'm making my brush strokes follow that three-dimensional curve that we talked about. And then, oh my gosh, I always forget about this, especially when using all three of these like this. We want to quickly grab our paper towel and pull it out of those areas of highlight. Because with watercolor, we have to plan ahead for what is going to be the light areas, and we're going to leave those blank. So like right here, I just watered it down a little bit more with my paintbrush and then grabbed it out with my paper towel so that I'm leaving it kind of light right there where the white space is. And it looks like I forgot to do that before. And I have a white in my watercolor set here. And if you have white in your watercolor set, you can try to add the white back in. You could also use like a white gel pen, or I don't think it's cheating. You could use your white ink over there or your white gouache if you wanted to later when I show you. I mean, but if we wanted to be traditional with the watercolor, we would leave it blank where the white is going to go. All right, now I'm watering down my medium red. So just my kind of pure red here. And since I just said that, we want to be really mindful about leaving that one light area pretty light. You might go ahead and paint it and then pull it out with the paper towel just to make it feel a little more organic right there. And I'm going to go ahead and do this red all the way across because we can always add that darker red. Oops, I just went into my shadow. I went into my shadow with both the orange and the red, but that's okay. I can cover that up. If you did that too, then we'll fix that issue together. So I'm just pulling out where the highlight is with my paper towel so that that feels nice and organic. I might even go ahead and do that here as well. And then you can try to imitate the shape that you're seeing where the red leads into that orange and yellow. And we could always add more yellow or orange in the next layer. And yeah, I'm just gonna not worry about that where I went into the shadow. And I should be able to cover that up with my next layer with a darker black. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and do a little bit of a light green and a dark green on those leaves for the first layer as well. And I'm just using a medium round brush here, by the way, if I didn't say it. Whatever brush you feel comfortable with. Getting into all these different shapes and following these three-dimensional curves. And then, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and use the dark green because I want to let the dark green bleed into the lighter green. And I'm going to switch to this liner brush for the dark green so that I can try to get some of these little thinner lines to happen along the edge of the leaves. But again, I want it to be nice and bleedy here. So I'm going to let these two colors touch and bleed into each other. So you really want to let the way that the watercolor naturally behaves work in our favor whenever we can. So letting those things happen on purpose can be really nice. It's also if something's still wet, like if your background is still a little wet, you can leave a little gap between where things are touching. I think that lends a nice effect to watercolor when you leave a little gap in between. All right, so now let's move on to the gouache. Um, I'm gonna actually just take my paper towel and I know I'm gonna have to redo these colors for the next layer, but I'm just wiping out the lid of my watercolor with my paper towel to get it nice and clean so I can set it aside. Since I am just gonna run out of space on my desk if I don't. Okay, and now let's bust out the gouache. Got this Artist Loft jelly gouache here. And I'm going to use my little palette, my plastic palette off to the side to create some washes of these colors. And a nice thing to do if you've got the same kind of jelly gouache that I do is I'm going to use a little spritzer that I have here to spritz my gouache to keep it nice and wet. Um, all right, so we need all those same colors. So I'm spritzing my yellow, my greens, my red, my orange, and my black for the gray. And then I'm gonna actually use a pipette here just to zip it along a little faster as well. So if you happen to have one of these, otherwise I would just use your paintbrush and just take your paintbrush and just keep loading it up and dripping water into some of these wells here because we're looking for a puddle of pigment. And with the watercolor, I feel like it can be easier to water it down. Um, Maybe you were struggling with it, but hopefully it was easier. But with this gouache, since it does, it is a little thick, we really just want a little bit of gouache, and then we're just adding it to that puddle to get it to be nice and transparent. So we want all three of these in the first layer, the ink, watercolor, and gouache. We want all three of them to be super light. Um, so really watered down and washy. So I've got that gray there. And then I want a little puddle of yellow. And then a puddle of orange, and then red, and then my two greens. And I should have just enough space in this palette to do all of those. I'm gonna go ahead and make them beforehand, and I'll show them to you as soon as I'm done here. So I've got my gray, my yellow, my orange, my red, and then the two greens. And I might actually add a little bit of black to one of my greens to make it a little darker. I can't recall if I said that I did that to the last one, or I guess I didn't, but it looked darker than this darker green did. So I got my gray, my yellow, my orange, my red, a light green, and then a darker green. And I did add a little bit of black to my green. So I love that someone just said, I'm so relaxed and zen. Like, I have been having one of the most stressful weeks of my life, y'all. I'm glad I'm coming across so zen. This is just another reminder about why artwork is so good for all of us, because it's like, you know, soothes our nervous systems. So yeah, if you're nervous about this, just, you know, ask yourself what the worst thing would be if you messed up this strawberry painting. And you could just do it again. Oh, I didn't erase those pencil lines again. Like I keep missing the opportunity before I add water. I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. I'm just gonna take the side of my eraser actually and just take the top layer off of that.
Hey, Adrian, we have a couple questions.
Okay.
How do you cover the containers of gouache when you are finished?
Mine comes with this Artist Loft Jelly Gouache set comes with a plastic lid like this. So that's how I'm covering it up, is just putting that back on there and then closing it. You could, wipe it out with a paper towel, clean it up and everything if it's like too, if you're using your lid or your watercolor, like with the watercolor. I just did that so that I could close it and set it aside. I just took my paper towel and wiped out the lid so that I could close it. So you'll definitely have to deal with, remaking those colors later if you do that, but not a big deal. Okay, so we're gonna do the same thing here. I told you it's gonna be very similar for all three of these. I'm gonna go ahead and paint the background. Bumped my camera there. Um, yeah, so whenever I teach about gouache, people have a really hard time really with all three of these, I feel like people have a hard time watering them down and using these thin washes to begin with. And I feel like I'm always having to make a case for why it's so helpful to work in washes because people want to go with thicker paint. I'm actually even teaching an oil painting class right now on Thursday evenings, and I feel like I'm often in that class having to make a case for the fat over lean rule that you've maybe heard about oil paint. And that's the idea that you start with thin and then you get thicker as you go. And um, that really applies to a lot of water mediums as well. even acrylic paint too. You have more control over what you're doing when you start out super light and washy like this. The layers will also dry faster. You'll be able to rework things. You'll be able to control your values better. There's just so many benefits of starting super thin with your paints like this. And I know, like, I guess there's just something about, I feel like the movies have done this to us because whenever we see a painter in a movie, it always cracks me up. It's like, anybody who's given birth to a human being before. And if when you watch the scene in the movie when the woman goes into labor and how, labor goes and delivery in a movie, it's not like real life, right? And so it's same thing anytime there's a scene with a painter in a movie, we always see them using this really thick paint and just like throwing thick paint onto the canvas and so dramatic. And then they step back and it's a masterpiece. And it's like that definitely can happen, like people do paint with thick paint. I'm not saying that you should never paint with thick paint first, but when you're an absolute beginner and you're learning how to paint, you're going to have more control over the situation if you start out with thin paint. You may not get to immediately live out your cinematic artist dreams, but you're going to get there eventually, and it's just going to help you get there in the long run by being a little more patient with the way you're layering things. All right, so we're going in order the same we did last time so that we can let that background dry while we work on the middle of the strawberry here. And like I said, all three of these, they're going to be very similar in these early stages. I'm trying to get us to I'm like, oh dear. I'm like, are we going to be able to, we're going to at least get a second layer on all of these. And I might have to demonstrate the third layer on the other example that I have, but it's going to be fine. But like I said at the beginning of the class here, that they're going to be very similar in these early stages. Okay, but here's the difference with the gouache. We don't have to worry about that highlight because we can add that highlight in later. Like you could leave it lighter over there where that highlight's going to be, but you don't really have to because the gouache is so thick that we can easily put a nice highlight in on top when the next layer is dry. All right, so move into that orange. I feel like I thinned out my gouache even more than my watercolor. I could have probably gone a little thicker, but definitely practicing what I'm preaching here about oh no. Okay, so see, that's what happens when you don't leave that gap and the background is still wet and it's going to bleed like that. So I'm trying to leave a little bit of a gap. And in a perfect world, we would let that background totally dry before we add anything that's touching there. All right, I think let's prepare our ink palette before we add those greens because I'm like that's all still pretty wet. Okay, so we're gonna really be doing a juggling act here. So now I'm gonna go ahead and make some greens and start with yellow. My little ink palette here. I'll go ahead and set this on here so y'all can see what I'm doing. And I'm adding my water with the pipette. You can just drip your paintbrush onto your palette to get it to be a puddle of water.
Adrienne, when you have a moment, someone would also like to see the gouache palette that you put together.
Oh, okay. It was this one, the one with all the watered down gouache. was the same colors. Okay, so now I'm just making my ink palette so that I can wait for the to my camera again. I'm just gonna make one green to start here. And then I need to make a black. So I'm gonna use my walnut stain, the dark brown and the blue to make a black. And then we're gonna water that down so that it can look gray. And it maybe it's not gonna be like a perfect slate black, but it's going to look gray. A little too dark blue there, and we mix up the brown with it a little more. All right, and then I need a red and a reddish orange. And there's my dark green. I'm gonna make this my lighter green. And I'm making sure that these are all little puddles of pigment, so really watered down. I mean, honestly, that's the most important thing here. I think, like I said, this was going to be like getting started with all three of these and then starting to add the lighter layers. Um, I'm going to show you how to continue on without me towards the end of the class using my other example. But I think if you start nice and thin with all of these, you're going to have an easier time building up to the thicker paint with all three of them. All right, let me set that off to the side without spilling it. And I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna paint the background with water and then drop that gray in there. Probably should have erased those pencil lines again, but that is okay, because I'm gonna be able to cover up. All right. It's not the most perfect gray, but that's okay because I think on my last example, it kind of had a little bit of a bluish tint to it. And I think this actually matches the background in the strawberry picture. So I'm not too worried about it, but you're probably seeing like the little striations that are showing up with the ink, the way that it bleeds. It definitely has a different look to it, just like all three of these have a way that they bleed. And you get those little, like these feathering things that happen when the ink bleeds. I mean, it happens with all three of them, but
Adrian, do you know if the inks that you are using are similar to the Bombay inks by Dr. P.H. Martin?
no, those I believe have more of a gum Arabic binder in them. I don't know exactly what kind of binder they use, but this Sennelier brand specifically has a shellac base to it. So that's the difference between these and the Peach Martins. Um, I don't know what, not an expert on everything, but I do know that they're a little bit thinner. They don't have that same, um, because shellac is like nail polish. It has a very thick, so these are even different than like Liquitex or the acrylic based inks, because they have the shellac in them. Okay, so the next thing was the yellow, and yeah, the ink definitely has the colors are very vibrant. I think that's always been something that has made me drawn to it. I think even just like the way this yellow is going on, even though I watered it down, it's still coming across just a little brighter than maybe the other two did. Um, but once we go thicker with all of them, you'll see a difference as well. Oh, I forgot to make my orange. I'm just gonna go ahead and turn this yellow into orange by adding some red to it. Yeah, same thing with as with the gouache. We don't have to worry about those highlights because we can go back in and add, but you could go ahead and dab it and pull those out as well. And I'm just really letting these colors bleed into each other on purpose. Oh dear, I was trying to leave a gap to keep it from bleeding into my background, and it happened anyway. All right, and then the green leaves. Although that background might need to dry a little bit. I'm just gonna go ahead and do a few leaves anyway. Just letting those colors bleed again, and I'm really just leaving a gap because I don't want it to bleed into the background. Okay, so I'll probably just do one layer on a lot of these backgrounds. Oh, it's happening again. So if that's happening to you, we're just try to grab it with a paper towel, let it dry, and then we can always do another layer on that background, even though I just said I wanted to only do one layer on the background, but now I've got that little moment to try to cover up. But you can in the next layer always cover those things up. Okay, so I'm going to set the ink and the gouache aside. And even though I still didn't do that green on the gouache layer, go back to my watercolor for the next layer on the watercolor. We got 20 minutes left. Okay. I'm going to use this little Filbert brush. I'm going to go a little thicker with, I'm not going to worry about that yellow again this time. I'm going to just go for it with the red. And I could always layer a little bit of orange on top of it if I wanted more orange. But I'm gonna be mindful of where that highlight is. And I'm definitely going thicker this time, not quite as watered down. And just noticing those contours on the strawberry. Oh, I went into that shadow again. Oh my goodness. I was like, maybe this could be one of the last layers I do here if I could get it right. But you're probably going to want at least 3 or 4 layers on all of these. So y'all are going to have to finish these without me because we just don't have enough time in the class to fully develop all of them. But I just want you to really see the differences between them and the similarities as we start to go thicker with the paint. So I can let those layers touch and blend and following those curves and contours of the strawberry. I'm leaving the area sort of alone where that highlight's going to be, like going a little bit inside and around where I want that highlight to go. I'm doing the same thing over here. And once it starts to like bubble a little bit, then that's the paper telling you, hey, that's enough. The paper will tell you when it's getting a little too wet. And so you just have to listen to the paper and not force it, not force another layer and start overworking things. Right, and then work on that green. You could also put another layer on the background, although I would wait for the strawberry to dry before I do that. Go ahead and putting, I didn't leave any blank spots for my highlights on the leaves here. But that's okay. Now I'm going to think about where those highlights are going and try to go around with my lighter green, leaving a few little empty moments for some highlights. So that's definitely one of the main differences between watercolor ink and gouache is that you've got a pretty thick opaque white with both ink and gouache that you can use. But with watercolor, you have to plan ahead for where those highlights are going to be.
Adrian, someone asked years ago, my high school art teacher had us using this masking fluid thing to keep spaces white. Is this not a thing anymore?
Oh yeah, you can always use masking fluid with watercolor as well. That is always an option. And I plan to have some classes with some masking fluid at some point. I keep meaning to do one and just have not worked that into one of these lesson plans yet. But yeah, you can always use masking fluid and then you take the masking fluid off. You paint it where you want the highlights to be and then take it off and you'll have the blank paper peeking through. So I'm just painting that dark green and being mindful where the highlights are going to be and kind of getting up to the edge there. So those leaves might be feeling kind of done soon already. Really just depends if I want to put like a darker shadow in there next. I'll probably wait until they're dry to add the black shadow. Otherwise, if I put black right now, it might bleed a little too much. Like I want the dark green and the light green to bleed together, but I would like that black to like sit separately. So I'll wait for the black shadow on the next pass. Hopefully we'll have time, but if we don't, when that's totally dry, we can go in and add the black. Although one thing you might do while things are still a little wet, speaking of black, is water down some black and add it to that red to make that dark red that we talked about and let the dark red go ahead and bleed a little bit into the lighter red on the strawberry. You could always do that on the next layer if you feel like you'd rather wait. If it's too wet, I wouldn't do it if it's too wet. I might even add a little bit more of the lighter red to it as well to get them to bleed together even more. I'm trying to zip it along for my own sake here as well. But there's nothing wrong with being patient with these layers. I highly advise you just be patient with them, but Yeah, maybe do as I say, not as I'm doing with that one. And I still gotta wait for that to dry again to put that shadow back in. I think I might end up just making this one fatter than the other ones. Or, I don't know, let's see. I just want that to dry a little faster so I can add the shadow over there. Okay, on to the gouache again. So we're going a little thicker each time with the gouache. I'm going to start with those leaves since I didn't get to them in the last layer. And this time I'm just using my puddle of pigment that I have and adding to them with thicker paint. So I'm kind of using my palette puddles to yeah, to like mix with a little bit here. All right, so go ahead and put that green on there. And yeah, we're just gonna see how far we can get in 15 more minutes or 13 more minutes. So really, after you get the first layers in there, it's up to you how thick you want to go with your next layers. Just know that like once you go that thick with the gouache and the ink, you can't put it back. So I'm just making it a little bit thicker than I went the first time. And I was trying to keep those from touching, but it still happened. So yeah, in a perfect world, you're waiting for everything to dry before you move on to the next thing. It's an aspect of planning these classes that I try to watch the clock and keep it around the same time when I'm planning, like be aware of, it's been around an hour and a half and I should be calling this done. But I recall when I was planning for this class that I just kept wanting to add to those examples and they ended up, like especially the ink one, ended up a little more developed than I know we will get with these together in the class. But we're definitely seeing the differences between all of these as we're painting. And that was the whole purpose of the class, is to see the differences, to understand the similarities, which is keep them washy in the beginning, and you'll have more control. Let them bleed together where you want the colors to blend, because as like this red and this orange are bleeding together with all of these mediums, it's really fun to just let them just naturally blend and bleed together like that. And yeah, we can put the highlights back in with the gouache, with the white gouache and the white ink, so we don't have to worry about that. But with the watercolor, we want to plan ahead. All right. So back to the ink. The next layers here. So I'm going thicker this time. And then squeeze out a little bit more ink onto these just to get them to be a little thicker. Otherwise, I'm just putting another layer of washes on, which is not a bad idea, especially like I said, you'll get more control over what you're doing if you go, you know, just a tiny bit thicker at a time each time. But I'm going to go ahead and go a lot thicker with this layer. You can start to see what the thicker ink will look like. And you can definitely start to see that sheen that I was talking about in this brand come across when you use it thicker like that. But that'll come across even more when you use it, super direct and thick. Okay. Go ahead and put a little green on there too. All right, and I want to go ahead and do that shadow, but I really got to wait for it to dry. All right, so going back to the watercolor one now, we'll try to pull it together a little bit here and put that black on there, and those details in black are definitely gonna start to make it feel a little more complete. So likewise, that dark green in the shadows of the leaves. So I'm just going really direct with that liner brush now. You can kind of stipple with it, do like some little dots or like a scribbly action. You can do that with all three of these, kind of draw with your paintbrush to get some details to happen. So you really can use it pretty direct. I mean, I've got it nice and fluid, so it's moving around, but um, it's just not going to be quite as thick as the other two when you use it more direct. But I can add some water and like bleed that around too, so I can start to get some more detail moments to happen. Okay, and then I'll take the black and just do some of these dots for the seeds. Yeah, you might want to do another layer or so to make your reds really come across even more, but I'll just go ahead and put some of those details on mine. And then I never did put that shadow in, so let me go in nice and thick now with the black. And I'm just gonna draw that shadow on. And fill it in. I can't believe how many opportunities I missed to put this shadow in, and I'm glad I remembered. And that'll really anchor it down, and I definitely am probably going to want another layer on the shadow to make it feel nice and full. Okay, and then you can use the white. I have a little white here in my set, and I can see what that'll do if I add the white. And it does look like it gives it a highlight, so I can paint those little diamond shapes around and put the highlights in. You can let things bleed again. You can always have the option to let any of these water mediums bleed in a controlled way if you want them to. It's when the bleeding happens and you don't want it to happen that it's an issue. All right, and then let's see. I think I'm gonna have to do a little cooking show thing and just jump to these other examples here because we are just running out of time. We got 4 minutes here. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of mime what I would do next because I think we've done the hardest parts together, and that's getting those layers, thinking about the plan of how the action that we're gonna take. So now you'll go in with the thicker red and get that thicker layer on top, and then you can use it really direct without any water at all. Once that kind of medium middle layer has dried, I would do one more layer on all of these and then let it dry. And, same thing that we did, just letting those reds and oranges bleed together, maybe add a little yellow back in, tweaking your light green and your dark green. And, it's the same thing painting all of these. It's just a different medium. But I'm going to take the direct ink with, the gouache, take some of my white here and just go nice and thick with it. So I'm just loading up this liner brush with that thick gouache and just see how thick and direct it is when it's dry. So when it's totally dry, then you can really manipulate the details that you're putting on there, and you can really just draw with it with that liner brush. And you can do the same thing with the ink. So I'm going to jump to the ink and do the same thing. So let's say I want to add some of the black seeds on there. Then I'll take this thick black. Like, how thick is my black going to be? I did water it down. And I can go in and do these little seeds, right? And just really make them sit on top. So it's going to be nice and thick. So when you don't water it down, once these first, second, third, maybe even fourth layers are totally dry, then you can really control what you're doing with these later layers. And you can even go on top with like a wash and clean things up if there's like some little moments in between. So, you can, with the gouache, I was saying once you go thick, you can't really go thin on top of it. But that is a nice thing about the ink. You can like glaze over. I could wash over this entire thing with red and it would kind of give it a glaze of red. I'm not going to do that now because I just painted that black and then that would smear the black, but like I'll add a little red right here that's a little thinner, and you can see how it like kind of covers up that white, but the white still can peek through. So then I could go back in and put the white ink on top of that. Okay, and then when you're totally done, you can peel off your tape and you should have a nice little clean edge around all of these. I'll just peel one of them off so that you've got these nice little frames around all of them. All right. Hopefully, even though we didn't get to finish all of those, and I know it was very ambitious, we still checked all the boxes that I wanted to check in the class tonight. We talked about the differences and similarities with them. We got started with all of them for sure. We talked about the best policy for layering them and how to go with those thicker, lighter, or last layers and get those details on. Thank you all for the wonderful feedback in the chat. I appreciate it. And yeah, y'all, if you want to hold up any examples that you have so far, if we could go just a couple minutes over here, I'd love to see some of y'all's examples. Chanel can spotlight you real quick. If anybody wants to just hold up, I know they might be taped down. It might be a little tricky, but I'd love to see where you landed at the end here. Or I can spotlight a couple of people I see holding them up. Let's see, this is Luz. Ooh, I love how you let the bleeding happen there. Um, that's lovely. Yeah, that's a nice washy example there. Okay, and this is Christine. Yeah.
Adrian, I can do the spotlight. I was
Oh,
here. It's just the Zoom, the way Zoom has the cameras now, it's not in order that I can get to easily.
oh, I see. Okay, yeah, go for it. I'll let you take over. Those are beautiful, Christine. Thank you. I see you're taking your time waiting on the ink one. No rush for sure. All right, and this is Kara with that green tape. Okay, yeah, that's a great start to all three of those. It looks like you're really waiting for your layers to dry on the ink and the gouache here there. The watercolor, I know it's hard when you to wait for those layers to dry, but you can go in and clean up some of those edges too later if you wait for that watercolor to dry. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, look at that. I'm really feeling the three dimensions in that one. These look wonderful. All right, this is Barbara. Oh, I like how you already started to put some of those little white gouache seed details in there in the middle on the gouache and the ink one. That's nice. And yeah, you can always add that to the watercolor one as well. There's no law that says you can't mix these together. I mix them together all the time, by the way. Definitely combine gouache and ink regularly in my practice, especially. Oh, look at that nice big strawberry. The smellies, I like your name there. That's cute. That's lovely. Look at the detail on those leaves. It's really fun. Oh, look at those beautiful bright strawberries with that little highlight off to the left. That is gorgeous. I love those. Those are so fun. Yeah, those are really beautiful. Love how nice and thin you stayed. That's a great example of how they can just feel complete if you keep them nice and thin and uniform like that. But yeah, you've still got some areas to explore and add some details on all of those as well. It's lovely. That does look like something I'd hang in the guest bedroom, even though I said let's not put that pressure on ourselves. And Diana, those are beautiful reds you're using there too. I can tell you're getting a little thicker with the gouache and the ink, and that's a really nice flat wash on that watercolor. And I'm really feeling the three dimensions on all of those. The leaves are popping off. That's gorgeous.
We did have a couple other people who had their pictures raised, but they took them down. So I didn't know if Sharon and Sennelier, if you still wanted to show yours or if you are done. Okay, I think that we're done.
Okay. Well, thank you all for sharing. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me. And next week, we'll be doing the expressive eyes in pen and ink. So look forward to seeing you all again then. Thank you. And thank you, Chanel. Y'all have a great evening. Good night.